So we're now going to look at a CSS hack, which is basically clear fixing on a parent container. Now that sounds a little bit complicated, but we've already seen how to clear with a extra span element or whatever element you choose to clear on, which solves our container problem. We're now going to look at a class that we can reuse, but in a bit more of a sensible way. So what we're going to do is, in our markup, we're going to get rid of this span. That's just generating excess markup that we don't need. And we're going to go ahead and get rid of this clear class that we created. So now when we have our box left and box right, this returns us to our previous problem. So this clearfix hack is going to basically fall under a common class which allows us to add this to the parent container. So this is going to look like this. It's going to be container clearfix. So what we're practically saying to this is create me a container, but bear in mind that there may be elements floated left, which we have here, and there may be elements that are floated right, which we have here. So we're basically saying, beware, there are elements floated. Please, clear fix this for me so I don't have to worry about adding additional markup or adding any additional CSS. And it's a clean, easy way of just clearing. And this is typically, said as a CSS hack, but it's used very, very, very widely. So don't worry too much about the word hack. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and we're going to define this clearfix class in here. And we're going to talk about a bit about how we're doing this. So what's happening here is we're going to use something called pseudo elements, and which we haven't looked at yet, but we'll sort of learn about what they are here. Now we'll take a look at what they are first. So I'm going to say colon before, and I'm going to separate this selector, and I'm going to say .clearfix after. So what this means is it's basically saying I want to create a pseudo element, so an element that is there but it isn't a real actual element on the page, before and after where I define this clearfix class. So let's go ahead and set content, which is a CSS property which allows us to define specific content to a capital A. It can be anything. When I go ahead and refresh now, you'll notice that I've got two A's here within this container. So let's just go ahead and inspect this, and you'll see that we've got this before here with a double colon and here with a double colon. And we can define this with a double colon if we want, so we could do that. It doesn't really matter. It's purely preference of how you want to define it. It works in exactly the same way. So I'm going to go ahead and just use a single colon. So now that we know that within here we've got this before and after, how can we use this to our advantage? Well, remember before we created a span element after the content within our container. So if you look, it doesn't put it before the container, it puts it within the container before everything else. So what we can do is we can use this to our advantage and use this to actually go ahead and clear both. We're going to do that on the after element. For the before and after elements, we're going to set the content to nothing, and this is due to an Opera bug, and this lets us basically get around this. And we're also going to say display table, and what this basically means is it's using table basically. Well, we don't really need to do this, to be honest. It's only really if you are using the before pseudo selector to basically contain margin top, if you're using the margin top property of elements inside of this, but it's a little bit tricky to understand at this point. So let's go ahead and just set the before and after to content space. That avoids the Opera bug. But what we're really interested in is this clearfix after pseudo element. So we redefine this. What we want here is clear both. What this is going to do is, for clearfix after, if it's clear both, what we're going to do here is set this to a clear both. And we had this before, we had a span element doing exactly the same thing. Now, we also have a sort of take into account Internet Explorer 6 and 7 if you really need to support this. Personally, I don't, but it's probably useful if you do want to. I'm just going to set clearfix because IE 6 and 7 do not support before and after. And basically, this rule basically allows us to just trigger functionality in these older versions that allow us to apply this hack. So I'm going to say zoom 1, and this looks a little bit weird. What we're now going to do is go ahead and just remove this. Take a look at this as normal. It doesn't work. So in the container, we now want to add this clearfix class, and you should see okay, I see. Let's go ahead and add this display table in here. And we'll go over to our index.html and add our clearfix in there. And there we go. So this is basically how we apply, but because we have a display of table, we're basically saying that we want this to it's hacky, it's very hacky, but we're basically setting a completely different display type for this to allow this hack to work. Basically, you wouldn't ordinarily use a display of table on elements that weren't table. But yeah, this is basically how we would do this. So now what you can do is whenever you're using floats and you have a container with elements floated, you can apply this clearfix class, and it will go ahead and it will clear all of the floats inside that container for you.